This is the story of a proud and flamboyant man who was the first black boxer ever to win one of the most prestigious titles in sports. Between the years 1908 and 1915, he ruled the heavyweight division as no man had before him. But at the turn of the 20th century, his carefree lifestyle was despised by many of his fellow countrymen. A cry for the great white hope echoed across the land as sports fans awaited his downfall. Today, his legend lives on as one of the most controversial figures in the history of sports. But he remains one of boxing's best, Jack Johnson. HBO Sports presents Boxing's Best. The story of Jack Johnson. And now from New York City, here is your host, Barry Tompkins.
Hello, everybody. I'm Barry Tompkins, and welcome to Boxing's Best. This is the story of boxing's first black heavyweight champion. Jack Johnson was born in 1878 of parents who were slaves. He was born in Galveston, Texas, but left home at the age of 12 to work. He worked for a while as a sponge fisherman. He was a painter. He was a potato peeler. He worked on the docks and started fighting at the age of 13. He had his first professional fight at the age of 16 years. Here, the city of New York, which was one day to be his home, was still thousands of miles away and years to come. Jimmy Jacobs is boxing's preeminent historian. And Jimmy, I think it's safe to say that Jack Johnson came along much too soon and perhaps generations ahead of his time.
I would say so, Barry. Actually, Jack Johnson was a half a century ahead of his time. He was the first fighter who thought about self-preservation when he got into the ring. In fact, all of the films of all of the fighters around the turn of the century, the fighters actually impaled their face on the other man's gloves in order to get their own punches in. Jack Johnson was absolutely unique. He fought for 3 decades, and when he was through fighting at a very old age, if your life depended on it, you could not determine that he was a professional fighter. That was really something.
Jimmy, what was the reaction of the American public to a black man who was coming along and having an eminence in a sport that was predominantly a white man's sport at that time?
Well, in 1907, 1906, when Jack Johnson was demonstrating that he was the greatest heavyweight in the world, at that time there had been 5 white heavyweight champions: Sullivan, Corbett, Fitzsimmons, Jeffries, and Tommy Burns. Interestingly enough, Jack Johnson had to chase Tommy Burns all over the world in order to get a shot at the heavyweight championship. But at that time, the public did not want a black man to be the heavyweight champion of the world. And it was indeed a difficult task for Johnson to even get a fight for the world championship.
It didn't stop at the government, as a matter of fact, at the people. It actually stopped all the way at the government to try to stop Jack Johnson from the heavyweight title.
Well, that's true. When Johnson beat Burns in 1908 for the heavyweight championship, and Jeffries came out of retirement in order to try to beat Johnson, when they couldn't find a white heavyweight to beat Jack Johnson, the government passed a law, the Mann Act, in order to get Jack Johnson and get the heavyweight championship back to the white race.
It was in 1905 that Jack Johnson started looking for Tommy Burns. It was to be a 3-year search. He finally caught up with the man all the way in Australia.
Jack Johnson chased heavyweight champion Tommy Burns all over the world for the title he wanted so desperately. Burns insisted on drawing the color line, denying leading black contenders like Jack Johnson, Joe Jeanette, and Sam Langford a shot at the title. But wherever Tommy Burns went, Jack Johnson would follow. Johnson and his manager Sam Fitzpatrick borrowed thousands of dollars and pursued the champion in France, England, and then finally back in Sydney, Australia. While Burns was fighting less competitive European and Australian contenders, Jack Johnson was defeating the likes of former champion Bob Fitzsimmons. Tommy Burns had won the title by decisioning Marvin Hart in 1906. It was Hart who claimed the vacated heavyweight title, When James J. Jeffries announced his retirement in 1905, Jack Johnson had issued public challenges to all three champions. In each case, he was ignored. Finally, in 1908, after seeing both Burns and Johnson in action, some English reporters wrote that Johnson was Burns' master. Jack Johnson was ecstatic over the public pressure, and Tommy Burns was visibly upset. The champion tried eluding Jack by heading for France and then Australia, but Jack Johnson followed him everywhere. Promoter Hugh McIntosh guaranteed Burns $30,000, while Jack Johnson received $5,000. For the first time in history, a black man was fighting for the heavyweight championship of the world. This was not just a fight. Jack Johnson had the opportunity to gain dignity for an entire race that was still living in the aftermath of the Civil War.
December 26, 1908, Rush Cutter's Bay at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Round one. 26,000 fans hold their breath. Burns is defending for the 12th time. At 6'1" and 212 pounds, Johnson is lean and hard, a master craftsman who loves to set his own pace. Burns looks for an opening but is tied up. The challenger moves the champion around at will. The man in the white suit, promoter Hugh McIntosh. The press knows this will be a long afternoon. By round 8, Johnson is having the time of his life. A tired Burns answers the bell for round 14. Johnson pours it on, lifts, rights, hooks, uppercuts. Burns is defenseless. At this very moment, the police shut off the cameras and stopped the fight.
Afterwards, famous novelist Jack London, who was covering the fight for the New York Herald, wrote that Jim Jeffries was the only man who could defeat Johnson and rescue the white race. The words which were used to describe the outcome embodied the deep-seated racial tensions of the day. Jack Johnson had accomplished what no black man had before him. But even though he was a hero among his own people, the white American public eagerly awaited his downfall.
With me is Howard Sackler. He is the author of The Great White Hope. And Howard, I think it was when Jack Johnson came back from the fight with Tommy Burns in Australia that Great White Hope became more than just a phrase.
Yes, it became a prayer through America, an unspoken prayer, but a prayer nevertheless, which was also echoed by Jack London when he said, "Jeffries, it's up to you to wipe the golden smile off Jack Johnson's face." Now, the golden smile had been very prevalent throughout the Burns fight, which we just saw. Burns had repeatedly referred to Johnson's supposed yellow streak, which of course antagonized Johnson. So Johnson, as you've just seen, was smiling his golden smile at Burns as he was beating him to a pulp. While he was smiling, he would speak to Burns and say, "Hit me, Tommy, hit me here, hit me there," leaving himself exposed, which Tommy, of course, couldn't do. So that Jack London, who as you may or may not know, became a revered figure, a socialist writing figure in the Soviet Union, was expressing the racist feelings of his times in an extreme way.
Did that, do you feel, set the tone for how the public perceived of Jack Johnson?
I think it was a reflection of the tone. The tone had already existed after Johnson beat Burns.
How did Jack Johnson see himself?
He saw himself as the best fighter in the